Welcome back, everyone, to Behind the Shield, anniversary edition today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Marco Estrella. Thank you for joining us. I mentioned anniversary edition because it is our 12th episode, so our 12th podcast, rounding out the first year of talking about cybersecurity with a whole slew of interesting guests. We had Checkpoint, IBM, Ping. We had Byron Acohido from The Last Watchdog, and many more that I forget, but that were really, really cool. And we're working on the 12 next months of new and interesting guests, and we have some today for you. And who knows, 12 months, maybe another, we'll start, well, I won't say 12 years of podcasts. I think maybe Bill and Patrick might be retired by then. I don't know.
Oh, we'll have an AI replacing us, I guess.
Right.
Well, who knows? So let's start with the next 12 months, okay, of interesting shows. So as always, for those who are new to the show and you'd like to you like what you hear, you'd like to catch up on previous episodes, just go to virtualguardian.com. You'll be able to find the episodes there, or you can also find the previous episodes on your favorite podcast services. We're going to jump in really quickly, make sure we have plenty of time for our cybersecurity hot topics with our regulars, Patrick and Bill, as well as special guest today, Graham Cluley, and our sponsor today, Rudolph Araujo, of Arista. After our hot topic segment, Rudolph will take the spotlight for his topic, IoT, ransomware, insider threats, and your data, threat hunting to the rescue. So that's going to be pretty good. And then we'll close out the agenda with the usual question and answers from the audience. So if you have any during the show, don't forget, submit your questions, and we'll try to get it to as many as we can in the Zoom interface. So let's get to it. To help me navigate the hot topic segment today, I call upon my trusty panel of cybersecurity experts, and they are Patrick Naum, Virtual Guardian's CEO. How's it going, Patrick?
How you doing, everyone? Great to be here.
So Patrick helps clients with solutions on how to defend themselves against all manner of cyber threats. We have Bill Stroop, co-founder of Navilogic in Minnesota, and CEO of Virtual Guardian's U.S. operations at the same time. Lots of hats there, Bill.
I like switching them back and forth, but soon I'll only have one. So that's the good news.
All right. Our special guest, Graham Cluley, comes to us from the UK. Graham is a cybersecurity expert and host of the very successful podcast, Smashing Security, which is the winner of the Best Security Podcast of 2018, 2019, and the most entertaining podcast of 2022. Did you know I was going to mention that, Graham?
I didn't. If I didn't email you saying, please mention how good our podcast is.
Gorgeous.
Pleasure to be here. Hello, everybody. Lovely to be here.
Great to have you. Very happy to have you. Welcome. One day we all hope at Behind the Shield to have as many downloads as you have on your podcast there, Graham.
Oh, wow.
Good stuff over there. Quick question. How many years has your podcast been going, Smashing Security? How long have you been doing?
Too many years. 6.5. We've just put out episode 326 of the podcast. So we've been doing it for far too long. But well done. So this is your 12th episode, is it? That's true. You know, most podcasts, I think they only last 8 episodes on average. So already you are doing better than the average podcast. Most people start off with the best intentions and then, disappear. So to get to 12, I think is a real achievement. Most people have run out of steam by then.
Great. So to get to 326, you're once a week?
We are once a week, and the occasional little extra episode has crept out as well. Smashing Security sort of takes a light-hearted look at the last week of cybersecurity, weird things which have happened, peculiar stories, and it's myself and my co-host, Carol Terrio. Both of us have a background. We've been working in the world of antivirus for like 20, 25, 30 years in my case. Yeah, and some terrific guests as well. People like Gary Kasparov have been on, and Troy Hunt, and Mikko Hipponen. have been on. So we've been very lucky with the people who've come on and shared their expertise and have laughed at our lame jokes.
And do you do the 1 hour thing, or you just let the clock run and 2 hours, 3 hours?
Oh God, 2 hours! You've got to be kidding. No, we're an audio only podcast, so we don't do this video thing. This is all very, very strange to me. So we just do audio. We edit it down. It's typically about 45 minutes to 50 minutes. Sometimes we
Cool.
go a little bit longer, but no, we've never gone to 2 hours.
Okay, all right. It's not the Joe Rogan experience. Okay, very good.
I really hope not. No.
All right, well, great to have you. And certainly, last but not least, on the panel today, Rudolph Araujo has agreed to join us today. He's from today's sponsor, Arista. And Rudolph is a seasoned security practitioner with a couple of decades of cybersecurity behind the belt. He started his career responding to some of the world's most consequential breaches and now drives security product strategy at Arista Networks. Tell us a little bit about Arista and your role there, Rudolph, if you may.
Yeah, so Arista has been around primarily in the network infrastructure space, and for the last 15, almost 20 years now, and we're the market leader in the high-end data center markets of customers looking to build data centers, looking for network infrastructure. Arista is usually their top choice. And we're starting to expand now into other areas, both from a networking perspective to things like campus, but also into cybersecurity. And what I do at Arista is really help drive the security strategy for the company as a whole, and think about how do we align security with what we're already very good at, which is the network infrastructure.
Okay. How many employees are we looking at there at Arista worldwide?
So we're about 3,500 at last count, but
Okay.
we're growing. So that number is probably wrong already.
Wow. Okay, 3,500. That's pretty big. Well, welcome, Rudolph, to the show.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, gentlemen, let's jump right into the hot topic segments. We have some nice ones to discuss today, nice topics. And we're going to start with you, Bill. You followed the recent exploits of a US-based white hat researcher named, and I don't want to get his name wrong, it's Eaton Zveare.
I don't know him. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Zveare, okay. And he discovered some serious flaws in a well-known carmaker's platform. Can you tell us about what happened there?
Yeah, I think I'll start by saying, why did I like this topic? And I think that over the last 12 episodes, we've come on and we've dropped some heavy bad news about various exploits or problems in the cybersecurity space. And for once, taking a look at somebody who's on the white hat side, trying to figure out how do I still do what he's interested in, which is understanding how systems work and understand the security components of our e-commerce systems in this case. But going out and finding issues that could impact, and I say could impact a lot of people, but hasn't, because he took the road of finding his vulnerabilities, doing ethical disclosure, and moving forward. I think that's good news for security community. There's just not enough people out there looking to say, all right, how do I hopefully make something slightly better? So that's probably one of the things that caught me most. And I feel good today about coming on and not saying, all right, here's another disclosure issue that may or may not affect you. So I think that's one of the things that appealed to me about this story. So Eaton was looking at the Honda e-commerce platform. It's actually not for their auto side. It's actually for their power equipment side. So anything from their generators to boat parts and so on. And he was looking at the APIs that specifically are used to transact across this particular platform. And what he was able to do is find an API password reset that gave him eventually full access to the entire dealer network, that entire dealer platform. It started out with him initially deciding to look at Honda because earlier this year he looked at Toyota and was able to find similar types of vulnerabilities in the Toyota dealer network that would have revealed information about customers in Mexico. And he did the Toyota findings because his family's always driven Toyota. So He said, well, it'd be an interesting way to move forward. And in this case, a buddy of his family really enjoys Honda products, so Honda was next. He didn't say anything specifically in the auto side, but when he moved over to the power side, the marine and power tools and so on, mowers and such, he took a look at the e-commerce platform, and he didn't see anything initially by looking at the sites such as there's an Ace hardware site as well as a Pete power equipment site. Initially, there wasn't anything that he found, but then actually looking at the code, the Java code and the JSON, he was actually able eventually to find a reference to an API that was a password reset. And the only thing that was actually required for him to gain access through that particular API was a legitimate email. Fortunately, this was provided to him via the documentation, the video provided by Honda Power to say, this is how you're going to set up your e-commerce portal that they normally send to their dealers. And they had a test site that he was able to get the test email from. So he had the credentials he needed because he didn't want to actually go through and actually poke around in anyone's legitimate account. That was crossing the ethical boundary. But once he found a test email, he had access to this API. He gained immediate access into a test site. And from there, he was able to actually traverse throughout the site because the way that the dealer network worked is you could actually circumvent any type of login by simply modifying your dealer network number directly in the URL. So if you're dealer 1001 and your competitor's dealer network 1002, all you had to do is actually modify the dealer identification number directly in that particular URL, and off you go, you're actually moved over. So lateral traversing was pretty easy for him. And then when he continued to look at the overall code that's exposed on the site itself, he was able to eventually get full admin access to the entire platform by simply modifying one of the login request parameters, something that was basically the equivalent of admin access false to admin access true. And then he basically owned the entire dealer network e-commerce portal. So it was a pretty interesting way to go in, which is generally thought of as a closed system. I mean, if you're not sitting at an Ace Hardware or someone's Power Sports or Bill's Marine, you usually don't have access to the system, or you wouldn't really think about it. But if someone did see this and did what he did, the impact would have been access to over 21,000 customer orders, access to almost 1,600 dealer websites. There were accounts with first, last, and email. There was about 4,000. I'll round up there. 1,100 dealer emails. And then possibly what could have been done if you wanted to continue to push the boundaries was could have had access to the PayPal information, the Stripe information, all the payment information if you wanted to, and had access to the financial report. So it was a pretty interesting display of what can be done if you don't have strong APIs to begin with. You don't, in your APIs, reset passwords correctly. You don't have proper access controls within the application. So it's a good reminder that we all need to take a look at just beyond, the world of vulnerability management goes to the platforms and portals that we all assume are secure or provided to us. You think, great, we now have access to this wonderful portal that our vendor gave to us, but there are security ramifications that we all need to think about through that process. I'll also say that I know that we normally provide the URL to the story. If you're going to take a look at the URL, the story is good. Eaton's blog, far better. It's actually fairly kind of entertaining as well as educational. So highly recommend taking a look at his blog site. And that was my hot topic for the day.
Do you have difficulty recruiting and retaining good IT resources? Is your focus on your core business and not on IT? You need ESI. Entrust your infrastructure to a partner focused on your IT, delivering solid services, improving security, reducing risks of failure, all while reducing your TCO. Find us at esitechnologies.com and click on Managed Services.
That's they should definitely ship him a Honda Pilot or something for his trouble. At least,
I'm glad you brought that up because
at the very least,
Or a
they
lawnmower.
didn't. They sent him a thank you note. So
a thank you note.
there's
How
no
generous of them. How
Yeah,
very
exactly.
kind of them for doing. Have a,
What's the highest? What's the high end Honda there? Honda.
Couldn't
Yeah,
tell
and
you.
it's
I would say you moved to the Acura
Acura,
line
well,
for that type of work. but-
Acura, yeah, okay.
Yeah, go in the Acura. Part.
do you remember when Yahoo got hacked? And someone found a vulnerability which meant they could have accessed like 100 million different accounts, and they reported it to Yahoo. And I think Yahoo said, "Thank you very much. It's very good of you to tell us that. Here is a voucher which you can use in our online store. $12. You can go and buy yourself a Yahoo T-shirt."
Wow.
Doing that because they didn't have a bug bounty. So did Honda have some kind of bug? Clearly not. Really,
Nope,
If
no,
they
no
got a
bug
thank
bounty
you
program
note.
in place at all. And I don't think it was necessarily doing it for the bounty. It was because
Sure.
he really had the interest. But I do feel as though that they saved them from what could have been a very disastrous situation. So,
Yeah.
But
Honda,
it goes to show.
reconsider that.
But it goes to show that if it, the disastrous situation to a lot of these organizations is unknown. They can't quantify it. They have no idea. Because if they did, they would cut this guy a check, or I don't know what they would, fly him in their private jet. I don't know what they would do. But and it shows that it's still an uphill battle, because if they don't recognize the amount of money and damage and reputational or not that this guy may have saved them, it's crazy.
I mean, give
I think
give
that's
the
part
poor
of the
guy
problem, right?
a generator. I don't know.
What was that, Rudolph?
I was saying, like, part of the challenge with companies of this size is they've got hundreds of these websites that are lying around, some of which were built by, someone that probably didn't have any kind of cybersecurity awareness. And these are always the easiest ways to get in if you're an attacker, because, no one's coming in through Honda.com. They're coming in through these other sites that are less guarded.
Which brings me to my question here. It's a Honda problem for sure, but is it a third-party risk assessment type deal that we're talking about here?
The software supply chain problem.
The software supply. So it is a third-party risk assessment and necessity somewhere.
Yeah,
As Rudolph is mentioning, we don't know who's doing these websites, right?
Yeah, I mean, he points out in his blog, and it specifically says, when making a single page application in React or Angular, be careful as you build the application. Remember that your visitors' browsers will see all your code, ... So it is a reminder that when you choose the platform for something like this type of e-portal or e-commerce portal, make a good choice, because if you're exposing the code, you're also exposing your problems.
Bill, thank you very much.
You
Off
bet.
to the races. That was a great topic. We're moving on to the next one. And the next one is our guest, Graham Cluley. Graham, you have a nice, juicy, controversial one for us today.
Well, is it controversial or not? Let's find out. So
Let's find out what happened exactly.
everyone loves a lawyer, don't they? Oh, they're so wonderful, aren't they? I don't think they're paid enough for all the excellent work they do and the long ski holidays they go on when you're just about to move house. I'm trying to move house at the moment, as if you couldn't tell. And in the UK, at least, it's a nightmare doing that because your solicitors are always on holiday. But anyway, there is a big law firm here in the UK. They are called Knights. And there's been a bit of disgruntlement at Knights because some of the staff are a little bit grumpy because it was pay review time. And they thought, well, cost of living going up and everything. I don't know if you know, the UK economy is tanking. Let's not get too political. But anyway, the UK economy isn't doing too well. None. The rest of the world is doing that great, to be honest. And people who work at Knights were thinking, well, maybe we'll get a pay rise. Maybe we'll get something. And a memo came round telling them, no, none of you are getting pay rises, or the people who are getting pay rises, it's well below the market rate. And so there was you can imagine, a lot of pouting, a lot of grumpiness going on. And then workers opened their inboxes one morning and they saw a message had arrived seemingly from their HR department with the subject line, important notice, salary increase. And it said, hi, after assessing the current salary structure as provided under the terms of your employment, it was discovered that you are due for an annual salary increase. And it gave a double-digit percentage figure. Lovely, double digits. That sounds all right, doesn't it? Beginning in the upcoming fiscal quarter. The details of your salary increase, it said, are enclosed in the attached document. Please ensure all details are correct to avoid it. Now, I can see already Patrick has got his head in his hands, either because he's thinking, why have I been invited on the podcast? Or because he's thinking to himself, well, I bet that document is malicious. It's going to have macros in it. It's going to phish them. It's going to infect their computers. No, Patrick, that's not the case. And anyone who's watching this, not the case. The good news is that email had not been sent by cyber criminals. The bad news, however, was that the email was a complete lie, because the email was actually a phishing test. The email was actually sent under the authority and permission of Knights, the law firm, by some
wicked
phishing. Yeah, because of course, what's an incentive for people to click on something right now? Things like salaries definitely are going to be something people want to click on. So it's understandable. So people opened the attachment and they were told, nah, you failed a phishing test. Now, you might be surprised to find that the staff at Knights are not too happy about receiving this message, because they're already pissed off that they haven't had a salary increase. And now their HR department or whoever in IT has decided to email all of them saying, hey, salary increase, and we're only kidding you about not giving you a here is your salary increase. Only to be told that they've anyway, this has gone down like a lead balloon, and there are partners at the law firm who threatened to leave. Others just say this is completely boneheaded. And even though there were clues in the email, so it was obvious from the email address that it was sent from outside the company, and there were things like that. I mean, of course, cyber criminals do use social engineering tricks like this. But I guess my question for you guys is it legitimate for a phishing test, or is more damage done via this kind of phishing? Is this okay or not? Because it doesn't seem to have gone down that popularly inside Knights.
I
timing
think
was terrible.
Yeah, the timing was poor, and I would say that if it wasn't for the fact that the people within the organization already know that salaries are a hot topic, I probably would have avoided that. Maybe wait for it's time to choose your benefit package or something along those lines.
Or it could have been something less contentious. It could have been, we're thinking of initiating a new pizza policy at the company on Fridays. There's going to be a new flavor of pizza. Yeah. Vote for your kind of pizza. Something which doesn't rile people up quite so much as their financial compensation. I mean, I think it's legitimate to remind people that cyber criminals can use these tricks, but maybe not pull that stunt against your own staff.
You know what? It happened here. I have to be honest. We had a phishing simulation with I got caught on opening an email. I didn't open the URL or anything, but I did open the email, and they have those statistics.
Yeah.
And it wasn't as bad as what you just described. It was very close, and I considered it leveraging insider information, which can happen, by the way.
Yes.
But it begs the question on coaching, the people that are in charge of these awareness programs. They have to be mindful of a business reality, because if they're only told catch as many people as you can, if you're inside an organization, it's extremely easy. It's a walk in the park. So they have to be mindful and coach to be careful and what they piggyback on to launch these awareness programs. So you know what? A good thing you mentioned it, because I'm sure it's happening elsewhere. And these awareness folks, the job is essential. It has to be done, but there's varying degrees.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think, to piggyback on what you're saying, Patrick, these turn to be a lot of gotcha kind of moments, right? Like you will catch a certain number of employees that click it. And, I was talking to a CISO about this about a year ago. And one of the things he said is, look, if your security is dependent on someone not opening an attachment or clicking a link, you've already failed.
Yeah, it's true.
Right. So I feel like catching people opening up an email, in your case, not even clicking on anything, just seeing the email. I think there's definitely value in user awareness, but I'm not sure catching people opening emails is really the best way, like independent of the topic, right? Like I just feel like you'll always catch people opening an email. What are you really getting from it, right? Other than embarrassing the person and saying, hey, you opened up an email you shouldn't have.
And what
mass
you're really,
resignations.
and what you're really teaching people, the way to pass all these phishing simulation tests is never open an email at work ever. And we all know someone in the office who's like that. It's like he never replies, he never gets back to me. Well, he's just going for the full 100% perfect score on the phishing test, isn't he? He's just ignoring everything, because then he can't get. I heard, by the way, before we move on, I heard about another really cunning trick which you can do with a phishing test, which I'll just share with you, gentlemen, and everyone watching out there on the internet, which is to send out a message saying, if you're fed up with phishing tests and want to opt out of phishing simulations, then please click here and enter your details.
That's awesome.
On that note, thank you very much. We're going to have to move on. Patrick, you are the next up. We are a little bit behind on the clock,
Okay.
so I'll give you 2 minutes, Patrick.
Good luck.
And it's going to be some good news. The good guys might be gaining a bit of ground. Please enlighten us shortly.
Well, you just took 30 seconds out of my 2 minutes right there.
Go ahead. Yes.
So I came across this article from The Economist, and Graham probably knows an individual called Sharon Martin, ex-cybersecurity chief of Great Britain. So the headline of the article was, he argues that cyberspace, and I was reading this very diagonally, so I went from the beginning to the end of the title. It says, Sharon Martin agrees that cyberspace is finally getting safer. But then I read again, and it says, if unevenly getting safer. So it attracted my attention. So his premise on the article was that following an attack, I don't know if you remember the Mirai botnet attack in 2016, 20-year-old gentleman captured CCTV cameras, default passwords, and launched an attack against DIN. DIN moves data across networks, and he just literally, it was Amazon, Twitter, Reddit just stopped working for a day. And this really opened the realm of IoT security. And back then, the actual passwords are hard coded in these devices, so you couldn't even change the passwords if you wanted to. So it opened this can of worm of people talking about cybergeddon and Armageddon and whatnot, and catastrophic events, which basically alerted a lot of people to this issue, as well as governments. And he starts talking in the article on legislation and changes that the government is trying to make in terms of different, and putting responsibility more on the end users, right? On the software vendors to change policy. So in the UK and European Union, they've already stated that they will not allow default password. And it was really interesting to see how very prescriptive they were in terms of the laws and regulations to prevent them from replicating such a scheme of hard coding passwords. And he's articulating during this article that there's a lot of discrepancies as well in terms of how we prioritize certain security issues versus others. He went on to talk about the health service executive issue. I think it was 2021 in Ireland, where there was a ransomware attack, and because of the laws favor disclosure if there's information theft or identity or PII theft. Well, guess what? During that attack, people didn't get their care, they didn't get cancer treatment, they didn't get access to labs. So the argument was made to say, how come we favor? Okay, it's important to protect people's information, but how come you favor that versus affecting healthcare patients? And the reason why he talked about that is because they only advised the authorities when personal information was revealed, not when people didn't have care anymore.
Right.
Could you imagine that? It doesn't make any sense. So when you look at all of this, he's saying that governments are starting to step up, and we know that it's happening in the US as well, with the Biden administration wanting to put more and more responsibility in security by design in software vendor software, right? To make sure that we develop secure products from day one. Because the challenge we have with organizations today, they don't know what foot to stand on, right? Because ultimately cybersecurity it's a corporate responsibility. Enterprises today have to deal with all these security issues and investments and whatnot, and have to manage risk. So the government is saying, you know what, we have to put more responsibility into software vendors' hands on developing more secure products. So that was so Sharon was arguing that there's progress. Personally, I think it was a bit, jovialistic in the sense that this was 2016 and stuff has started to happen since then. We're 7 years later. It's moving, but very slow, albeit slowly. Contrast that to our attendance at Black Hat in 2022, and Jeff Moss mentioned everything's going to get worse before it gets better. So I think we're taking incremental steps in the right direction from a legislative perspective, but there's a lot of ground to cover, and it's becoming more and more important. And unfortunately, as is most of the time the case, there's not a lot of self-regulation by industry, right? So everyone's pretty much doing what they want. But I think the positive here is that there's going to be more incentive to making sure that security is thought of by design and not after the fact. So in the short time I had, I found it interesting. The news is positive, but not all that positive still. There's a lot of work to do.
As the most certified integrator in Canada, ESI can help you define security controls for each unique segment of your network, minimizing access to cybercriminals. Contact us at info@esitechnologies.com or visit esitechnologies.com.
We'll take every little bit, Patrick. Honestly, sometimes we do the show and it's always negative and people getting owned, but we'll take it. We'll take it. Thank you for making it concise. Appreciate everybody on the panel for the hot topic segment. We're going to move on to the next part of our show, which is our spotlight speaker, Rudolph Araujo, who will talk to us. And I'll remind you, his talk is titled IoT, Ransomware, Insider Threats, and Your Data, Threat Hunting to the Rescue. So Rudolph, the next 15 minutes are yours. Take it away.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Marco. Actually, a lot of the hot topics that we talked about in an odd way actually connect back to this topic, right? I mean, if you think about this last topic that Patrick brought up around, just the fact that, security has actually, in fact, gotten better. I think more people are concerned about it. Even the phishing tests, which, again, I'm skeptical about, have, I think, improved awareness. And there's been a couple of consequences of that I think are interesting, right? One is, one of our customers that's a CISO, said to me, look, we view every attack as an insider attack. And I was like, well, tell me more, right? And what he said is, look, these days, almost every attack has something, right? Someone's credentials got stolen, or there's an app that has been exploited. And in fact, I think if you look at the stats, from the likes of CrowdStrike and, others, 71% of the breaches these days that customers are dealing with, or incident response companies are responding to, show no traces of malware, right? And I think that is actually testament to the fact that as an industry, we're better at protecting against malware. Now, the bad news of that is the attackers have kind of changed their tactics, right? And this is that constant cat and mouse game, where they've moved to a model where now they're relying on non-malware techniques, right? These so-called living of the land techniques, where they might be using, tools that are already deployed, think Microsoft Office or PowerShell or Python or what have you. So that's kind of one kind of trend that we've seen. The other thing is, topic of IoT, and we talked about Honda earlier in this call. The devices on this planet have just quadrupled or pentupled, or whatever, pick your favorite multiple here, right? I mean, we've got billions of devices at this point, and that number is increasing exponentially every year. Now, from a company's perspective, they have all of this attack surface that they've historically not monitored. Heck, as we talked about in the Honda case, historically not even necessarily been aware of, to be able to protect and make sure they have controls over that. In our own experience, if you look at a typical kind of a campus network where customers have offices or branches and retail stores or things like that, we see somewhere between 40, sometimes even as high as 60% of the devices tend to be in this unmanaged bucket, right? And a lot of that is IoT, but there's certainly BYOD and things of that nature. Kind of an interesting example I'll give you of this, right? One of our customers, like 3-4 years ago, they found a insider that had actually tapped their voice over IP phones in a couple of sensitive locations, executive offices, conference rooms, etc., were recording these phone calls and then using those phone calls to do things like insider trading, blackmail, etc. Right? And so if you think about it, we're used to thinking about, hey, do you have endpoint controls on your Windows machines, your Mac machines? But what about that voice over IP phone, right? It suddenly opens up a whole new kind of attack surface, can of worms, whatever you choose to call it, right? And to Patrick's point, I think one of the challenges with this IoT space is there's really no standards, right? And this is where I think the government is starting to step in now and kind of apply some of those standards. But every device is cheap. That's the whole point of IoT. You can have these really cheap sensors or building automation or security cameras. And all of them are built without really any standards. They're hard to patch. They might have all kinds of vulnerabilities. I mean, we've seen devices that are running operating systems that were created in the 90s that are still out there, right? And so the challenge is, how do you manage that security problem effectively? And it gets even more complicated when you think about some of these are also medical devices, right? Or some of these are controlling safety functions at a utility, right? Or a power generation plant or what have you. So there's real world implications, much like that example, about, ransomware and the impact on someone's life. How these IoT devices are not just these cheap sensors that you might think about. They could actually have direct impact. I'll give you an example that we were actually involved in. So a healthcare system, a hospital system, got compromised through their industrial washing machines, right? So they, as you can imagine, a large hospital, they're not, using washing machines like you and me. They've got these large washing machines that are remotely managed, remotely controlled, etc. And one of these washing machines became the vector through which the attacker was able to actually get into their environment. And so we're seeing this as an increasing trend where things like the voice over IP systems, things like the HVAC systems, things like the washing machines in this case, are becoming the way that attackers get in. And of course, once they get in, because networks still tend to be so flat and have that kind of squishy center, once they're in, right? And they're able to kind of move laterally. They're able to kind of get to your crown jewels, get to those medical devices, etc. So while you might not care about the washing machine being hacked, if that washing machine is a route to get to an insulin pump, or if it's a route to get to your medical records database, that's a big problem. So as I mentioned, attackers are starting to use these tactics more and more. I think the most publicly documented example of this was the Lawrence ransomware. They're one of the major players in this space at this point. And they use the Mitel phone system at a number of organizations because there was a vulnerability in these Mitel phone systems that allowed them to kind of get in. And again, once they were in, they were able to get into the regular computing devices, to the regular servers, and so on. So this is an area that I think customers are really struggling with, because you can't put your traditional endpoint security there. You're not getting logs of these devices. So that you've got this broader attack surface, sometimes 100%, 120% more than what you're managing. But you're struggling with getting telemetry off it, getting investigative capabilities on it, getting detection capabilities on it, et cetera, right? And again, these IoT devices are not just important because they can be hacked. they're important because they provide a pathway to get into the rest of the organization. So what are we seeing that kind of the customers then do about it, right? I think the first thing is really understanding your attack surface. What is it that you're dealing with? A couple of things that we've seen work well for customers. One is get a good outside-in view of where and what does that attack surface look like. A lot of times that comes back to things like Shodan, tools that can give you a sense for your attack surface. But it's also important to have an inside-out view, right? Where you're looking at your network to see, okay, hey, which of these devices do I know, do I recognize, and which of them do I not, right? So one of the things we do, fairly often is, using a tool like an NDR, a network detection response tool. You can look for devices that maybe are speaking to a very few destinations, right? They're running very few protocols, not running any of your traditional kind of enterprise protocols like Kerberos or SMB, etc. Using maybe an uncommon OS, not your standard Windows, Mac OS, etc. Not using browser traffic. So if you've got the tooling to look for kind of those signs like that, that's often a good way to identify these non-traditional computing devices, right? These devices like IoT, like your washing machines, etc. So there's a number of things you can do to identify what that attack surface is, if you have the ability to kind of go look for and hunt for these signals, if you will, both from the outside in and the inside out. The other thing is if you're in industries like healthcare or manufacturing, you can look for very specific protocols. Like, so in the case of healthcare, for instance, HL7 or DICOM are common protocols that you'll find that these medical devices will use. And it's a good way to kind of get a sense for, okay, who are all of the devices, or what are all the devices on my network that are using these protocols, and kind of get a sense for the attack surface. So that's kind of one part of it, right? The other part is obviously understanding where your data is and what your data is. And that's the other challenge that I think customers struggle with. And look, encryption has certainly been talked about a lot as being, the solution. The reality of it is, as we look at customers and we look at the industry as a whole, encryption is still under prevalent, if that's a word, right? More and more, we are seeing encryption get there, but a lot of data still sits on the network or still moves on the network unencrypted. For instance, SMB, right? The file sharing protocol that is very common on Windows networks. I'd say, 90% of the traffic we see tends to be the unencrypted SMB, which has been, out there for, 20, 30 years. And even though Microsoft has been strongly pushing for SMB3, which is the encrypted version, very, very little traffic is encrypted, right? So the power of legacy is really powerful here. So while it is getting better, I think an attacker on any given network these days still has the ability to find enough kind of unencrypted data that they can cause that ransomware damage, or they can cause that destructive damage where they take down your data or disable the healthcare system. I think there was an example even in Germany, similar to what Patrick brought up, where the hospital actually couldn't check in patients anymore. And so they had to move this patient off to another hospital, which was some miles away. And as a consequence of that, that patient actually didn't survive. So these things have real impact. And so as much as it sounds theoretical, hey, what is my attack surface? Where is my data, et cetera? I think it's really important that kind of customers get a handle on this. The other thing that you can do once you've got a sense for that is look for the obvious, right? I mean, it might sound kind of dumb, but it's amazing how much you can find by just looking for the word password on the network, or looking for logins or SSNs or security numbers, or identifying numbers, etc. Look for files that are moving across the wire. And so we find a lot of threat hunting capabilities that will go look for these things that are just obvious on the network. And again, you can get a lot more sophisticated with this. You can look for protocols like DCRPC. You can, that can tell you exactly when remote execution is going on, etc. But if you're just getting started, like I said, just looking for the word password or the word PWD, or looking for a username, or looking for an SSN, just using maybe regular expressions, is a great way to kind of get a sense for where all of this data is. Because what you don't want to find out is when you get the ransom note, right? I mean, I always tell customers, look, I mean, detecting ransomware is actually not hard. You will detect ransomware inevitably when you get that ransom note, but you've got to be able to find it earlier than that. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble, right? You lose control of that situation. You're not left with a whole lot of negotiating power, even if you want to negotiate with the threat actors, which I know not everyone wants to, but it is unfortunately the reality. If you don't know what you're dealing with, it's very, very hard to kind of go from there. So what are some recommendations, right? Like, firstly, you really need to get into this continuous hunting kind of mode. You can't simply rely on what your endpoint controls are telling you or what your SIM is telling you, because a lot of these systems are not going to show up in these traditional sources, right? So the onus is really on you as a customer, or to engage with a service provider if that's how you manage your security, to get this continuous diagnostic to understand, okay, what is on my network, because that's going to change every day. I mean, we've seen things like Tesla show up on networks, right? So simply knowing what's on the network is a continuous hunting process. And then a continuous defense process, right? Depending on what you find, if you find a lot of these IoT devices, making sure you've got the hardening processes in place, right? Making sure you're working with the vendors of these devices. I saw an interesting report from McKinsey actually earlier this week that said, security is, I think, the biggest burden, or the biggest barrier, I should say, for customers looking to adopt IoT devices. And so the vendors are actually quite motivated now, both due to some of the regulations that Patrick touched on, but also because there is an actual financial motive. McKinsey estimates that I think the total addressable market could grow by billions of dollars, right? 25-30% more, if they could deliver a most secure experience out of the box. And I think that's where we're starting to see the vendors kind of really get their act together. But I think that there's a lot of pressure that you as a customer can also apply. And really part of this is making it part of your procurement process, right? And then the final thing is, like we said earlier, I mean, make sure you're implementing as much encryption as possible, right? So if you're using protocols like LDAP and HTTP and SMB and FTP, look at the secure options for that, right? Like, look at the encrypted options for that. How do you detect when unencrypted data is on the wire, especially if it's unencrypted sensitive data, and then work with the business owner saying, hey, you've got, a certain amount of time to remediate this, because this poses a real business risk to our environment. And then finally, the last topic is this topic that we touched on earlier, right? This whole idea of user behavior, and how do you continuously modify that? Again, while I'm not a fan of the gotcha kind of moments, I think training users is certainly important, and making them understand that, yeah, that little smart device that maybe you're bringing into work does add risk to to our organizational environment, and what you're allowed to do or what networks you're allowed to join with that smart device, making sure that they understand that. So that's my spiel for today, right? Just making sure that customers understand what attack surface they're dealing with, making sure they have the right controls in place, and then making sure that they're hunting as those things change very often. Back to you, Marco.
Never trust. Always verify. Have you adopted a zero trust security framework? Do you require all users, whether in or outside your network, to be authenticated, authorized, and continuously validated to get or keep access to your applications and data? Only the paranoid survive. So keep your intellectual property safe with a zero trust attitude. Contact ESI at info@esitechnologies.com or visit esitechnologies.com.
Thank you very much. Very interesting stuff, Rudolph. First thing that comes to mind is why is it so hard to detect maliciousness from an IoT device? Why is it so hard to do that?
I think part of it is there's just no visibility, right? I mean, you don't know, a lot of times you don't know these devices even exist.
Yeah.
So they're not part of your field of view, if you will. And as a consequence, you don't realize. I mean, this goes back to Bill's story about the Honda website, right? Like, I'd be willing to bet that maybe that Honda website was not part of anyone's inventory that they checked on every month or every quarter to say, hey, is this vulnerable, etc. I think we see that a lot with IoT because the number of devices doubles and quadruples within the organization very, very quickly. right? And so that's the big challenge, I think, just simply awareness of what's there.
Kind of like a type of shadow IoT, shadow IT, shadow IoT.
It's interesting, when everyone went home for COVID, the only things that were showing up on the network were the IoT devices. And it was kind of an eye-opening moment for a lot of customers in March of 2020. It was like, wait a second, no one's in the office. Where is all of this internet traffic coming from? And it's all headed to countries that maybe you don't want your traffic headed to, right? So there's a lot of, I think, awareness that still needs to be built around that.
Rudolph, do you see a lot of people moving to segmentation for those IoT devices? I mean, you talked about a couple of different ways to understand the consequences of these devices on the network, but I immediately go to segmentation in my mind. Like as soon as I discover them, I feel like I should move them so they don't impact my internal environment.
I think you're exactly right? I mean, look, segmentation is the way to do it. I don't know about you. My experience as customers struggle with segmentation to begin with, right? I mean, the networks are so flat on the inside that independent of IoT. But you're exactly right. And I think one of the things that we're starting to see the industry kind of get to is really an identity-based segmentation, right? So not just, hey, this VLAN or this IP address belongs there, but to say, I know this is an IoT device, and IoT devices have no business talking to my HR system or talking to my, my DevOps systems, et cetera, right? So I think that's absolutely correct, that's the way forward.
Okay, all right. Let me just see here if we have any customer questions from the audience. Is it really possible to contain a ransomware threat, or should you focus exclusively on prevention?
That's an interesting question, right? Because you absolutely should focus on prevention. But the idea that you can prevent every single threat, I think, is just, look, the number of cases we see of ransomware on any given day is testament to the fact that you can't really prevent them all. Someone is going to send you that salary raise email, and you're going to open that document and it's going to trigger ransomware, or it's going to come in through an IoT device. So I think my advice to customers really is, how quickly can you detect the ransomware threat, right? And there's a number of early warning signs that you can detect before that encryption event even occurs. And that's where we've been most successful, helping customers respond to a ransomware attack. Because if they're not able to encrypt anything, or they encrypt a very small portion of your infrastructure, you have a lot more leverage. Whether you're going to negotiate with them, or whether you're going to restore from backup, or however you decide is the right thing for your business. So yes, prevention is certainly important, but I think early detection, just like with healthcare, right? You want to do everything possible to prevent disease or prevent, but you've got to also do your annual checkup, right? And you've got to kind of go in and make sure you get, the scans and the blood work and so on, because with a lot of, especially terminal diseases, the earlier you catch them, the better your shot at kind of, beating them.
Yeah. And there's starting to be some solution. Well, there's some solutions out there that their claim to fame is prevention of ransomware, blocking of ransomware, usually solutions based on machine learning and behavioral analysis, obviously not signature based. And is that the way Arista is looking at the future, is with those types of solutions? Or
yeah, well, we're certainly heavily invested in that space, right? I think for us, again, if you can find those early warning signs, like, look, when a ransomware attacker gets in, they're going to try and find your crown jewels, right? They want to know what's the data that's going to cause you the most pain. And to do that, they're going to spend, hours, days, sometimes even weeks on your network, trying to find, okay, where's the file shares that have that data, et cetera. And so if you can detect that kind of traffic that is trying to enumerate, that, and a lot of that does take machine learning, because let's be honest, right? People are using file shares on your network all the time, and they're doing it legitimately because that's part of their job. So how do you detect this one kind of connection that is the ransomware attacker? So you do need a more data science-based approach. You can't just look for every SMB packet on the wire. And that is an area that we're very, very heavily invested in at Arista.
Okay. Panel, any questions for Rudolph on his spotlight talk? Any comments or questions?
Well, just maybe a comment on, you have to prevent, but you also have to be ready. if it happens, not just detect. You got to be ready, and that you need a proper backup, immutable backup, storage, regular testing, restore testing. A lot of companies we dealt with that paid a ransom. Well, recovering from, even if you have the keys, takes sometimes much more time than restoring from backup. So you're paying thinking you're going to be back in operation within a couple of days, but you're weeks in and you're not even in operations yet. So focus on those backups, regardless of what you do in prevention and detection. You also you have to be ready with your what we call our last line of defense. And one of our engineers even went further, says your last line is survival.
Last line of survival. Yeah, we're starting to hear that one a lot.
Yeah, and I think preparation is a big part of it, right? I mean, there's also the non-technical side of this, which is how are you going to deal with the PR fallout?
Yeah.
Do you have outside counsel, inside counsel that understand what their role is involved, right? Because a lot of this now, you've got 72 hours to disclose, right? And I think where a lot of companies fail is, look, having been in this industry for long enough, responded, I don't fault customers for getting breached, right? Because if an attacker is determined to get in, they're going to find a way in. I think where organizations fail is how they respond to the breach. They tell you, well, nothing really happened. And then, 6 weeks later, they tell you, well, actually, we lost every single record. And then, 2 months later, it's like, well, kidding. Actually, we only lost half the records, right? And I think that's when you lose trust. The brand values is lost. And so I think preparation, to your point, Patrick, is super important. And it's not just the technical aspect.
Very, very interesting. Gentlemen, thank you very much for all your insight. We're wrapping up time. We're getting up against the hour. Thank you for your talk, Rudolph. Graham, thanks for your participation. I want to thank our sponsor, Arista. Rudolph, very interesting talk in the panel today, of course. I want to thank Graham Cluley for taking the time from his super busy and successful podcast that we aspire to one day, Smashing Security, to join ours. Thank you to our regular panelists, Patrick, Bill, as usual, great job. Thank you very much. And of course, certainly not the least, thank you very much for all our audience listening and who will download the podcast at a later time. The link to today's show will be made available, as usual, sometime in the next few days. If you've missed any part of today's events, you can also listen to back episodes on virtualguardian.com. Thank you again for all your support. And as always, remember, when you're behind a shield, you're ahead of the game. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.